Well, I hope you weren't tired of quarterback discourse because the New Orleans Saints might have a third starting quarterback this season next week against the Washington Commanders. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to be taking a look at this New Orleans Saints victory against the against the New York Giants, as they get ready for their next week's game up against the Washington Commanders. We'll take a look at the tough road that's ahead, how the young stars helped to propel them to victory here against the Giants all the way down to the very last second. And we're going to lead everything off, though, with the big news, which is another injury for New Orleans Saints starting quarterback Derek Carr and what that could potentially mean for the New Orleans Saints moving forward. We appreciate you very much for being here, whether you're catching us live, catching us later, whether it's your first time or your next time. We appreciate you very much making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app and use that promo code Locked On NFL. You're going to be able to win $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup, win or lose, over at Prize Picks today. New Orleans Saints quarterback Derek Carr, despite this victory for the New Orleans Saints 14-11 over the New York Giants, leaves this game with a hand injury, which is believed to be a fracture in his left hand, and is also being evaluated for a concussion. And that could mean that he may not be able to play next week up against the Washington Commanders, which would lead him to missing his fourth game of the season. This is really tough for the New Orleans Saints, for Derek Carr, who has not dealt with this amount of injuries before arriving here in New Orleans, was injured like crazy last year, and now is piling up injuries again this year. And the New Orleans Saints are going to have another big decision to make if Carr is not able to go, because they could go back to Spencer Rattler. I'll tell you why that is a possibility, but they could also turn to Jake Haener. I'll tell you why that's a possibility. When we look at this injury for Derek Carr, dealing with the hand fracture, feared to have suffered a fracture in his left hand. It is his non-throwing hand. There are some people reporting that he left with a cast on his arm as well. I have not seen that, but if that is true, that could mean that Derek Carr could potentially not take snaps next week. If we look at some hand injuries to quarterbacks, non-throwing hand injuries to quarterbacks over the course of the past few years, there are some examples out there that they're not the exact same as Derek Carr's. Last year in week 4, Justin Herbert, the Los Angeles Chargers quarterback, fractured his middle finger, on his left non-throwing hand. So it was a fracture in his finger, not a fracture in his hand. That's why it's different, but he did not miss time. And then Baker Mayfield last year also had a hand injury to his non-throwing hand. His x-rays came back negative, but it was a really bad bruise. He did not miss time either. So with this being a non-throwing hand injury, there's a chance that depending upon what kind of mobility he has, what kind of cast can be given to him, or what kind of brace or support can be given to that non-throwing hand, that he could potentially still play. But is that going to lessen his ability to take snaps? Is that going to lessen his ability to run with the football, protect the football as well, should he be caught in the backfield, so on and so forth? Lots of different question marks for that situation if Derek Carr is to play next week. So if those question marks lead to him not playing next week, then the New Orleans Saints have to make a choice. Do they go with Jake Haener and have a third starting quarterback for this season? Jake Haener, again, has been the QB2 ever since Spencer Rattler got his 3 starts and his opportunities earlier on this season. Or do they run it back and go back to Spencer Rattler? I do want to say one thing about the possibility of going back to Spencer Rattler. If this is the case and Derek Carr does miss time, that does make the Spencer Rattler thing feel possible, because I think a lot of people would hear that and go, well, he got 3 starts before. They lost all 3 of those games. It didn't go great for him. So there's no way that they're going to go back to him. But I will say this, the decision to bench Spencer Rattler partway through that Los Angeles Chargers game was a Dennis Allen decision. It wasn't a Clint Kubiak decision. It wasn't a, Andrew Janocko decision. Obviously, it's not going to be those guys anyway. But it was a Dennis Allen decision. Dennis Allen is no longer in the building, and Darren Rizzi has promised every young player and every player on the roster a clean slate from the moment that he took over. You certainly saw that benefit a guy like second-year running back Kendre Miller in today's game against the New York Giants. So that's why I do believe it could be Spencer Rattler. The Saints could actually still go back to him if they decide that that's the route that they want to go. Now, there is value in seeing what you have in Jake Haener. Jake Haener's gotten a lot of pre-snap, preseason opportunities. He's gotten some second half opportunities, late game opportunities, but has not been given the opportunity to start a game yet for the New Orleans Saints in the regular season. So I could absolutely see the value in doing that, right? This whole portion of the last part of the season is about winning the games that you can win, no doubt about that. But it is also about evaluating your young talent. You saw 3 games of Spencer Rattler. Maybe you want to see a game or 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever's left in terms of how many games Derek Carr does miss, if he misses any time at all, which still we don't know about. We'll find out when we get to practice on Wednesday, basically, or maybe a little bit more before that. But that's where I could see the Saints say, okay, well, here's an opportunity to evaluate the young talent on the roster and give Jake Haener the opportunity to start. I could see the Saints going either way with this. I don't think there's necessarily a bad decision here. I spoke with Spencer Rattler one-on-one earlier last week. He spoke about all the ways that he's getting better, the things that he said that he would do differently, including using his legs a little bit more because he felt like he didn't necessarily do that over the course of those 3 starts. Being a little bit of a faster decision maker, all these other things are obviously things that people are going to point to. Jake Haener, when it comes with him, I think feels pressure a little bit before the pressure is actually there, but is really good at making quick decisions, but has had some issues with holding on to footballs, things like that. But that's just a young quarterback issue. So look, and this is all conjecture based upon like a little tiny bitty amount of snaps that we've seen either of these guys take. So for the Saints, this could be an opportunity to get to evaluate some of those young guys if they can't get Derek Carr back on the field. If they can get Derek Carr back on the field, Derek Carr will be on the field. Make no mistake about that. Bear in mind that not only is he being kind of evaluated for that non-throwing hand fracture, he's also being evaluated for a concussion that could complicate sort of the compounding of this issue moving forward throughout the next couple of weeks or next week or so. And so if he's able to go, he's absolutely going to be the guy out on the field because he's the guy that the Saints feel they can win the most games with, right? Like he's the guy that can win them games. And so they're obviously going to want to roll with Derek Carr if he's healthy and available to go. But if he's not, it becomes really, really interesting. And I hope that you're not over the quarterback discourse yet. All the people that love Spencer Rattler, all the people that hate Spencer Rattler, all the people that love Jake Haener, all the people that hate Jake Haener. It's all about the pop off all over again. But I'll tell you this much. There's no losing here for the New Orleans Saints in this situation. Under any circumstance, they find out if Derek Carr is not able to go, they will find out whoever it is that they choose, Spencer Rattler or Jake Haener, to step in his stead. They will learn whether they are the guy or not, right? Like there's nothing wrong with getting that information. You could find that they're not, that neither of them are the guy or one of them's not the guy, whatever. It's still valuable information to get. It's still a win for New Orleans to get that evaluation. Although you'd much rather, if you're the New Orleans Saints, have Derek Carr out there to give yourself the best possible chance to win going into the next couple of games in particular, because the road gets very, very tough for the New Orleans Saints with the Washington Commanders and the Green Bay Packers on the way. We're going to dive into those games here in a little bit, but coming up next, I want to refocus away from the Derek Carr injury and to the game in which he was injured, as the New Orleans Saints pull off a gritty win in an ugly game. But you still have something to look forward to here because it was the young stars that ended up making the difference in this matchup when it counted the most. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at Hillsdale College. Hillsdale College is doing everything that they can to democratize education. Think back to the things that you learned when you were in grade school and things like that. How much of that do you actually remember? And how much of it did you really love learning? Or how much of it would you love to be reminded of and learn all over again? That's where Hillsdale College can come in. They offer over 40 free classes. That includes lectures as well as quizzes, discussions, readings, and more, all for free. Yes, you heard that right. All for free. It's all self-paced, so you can go at your own pace. You can do it whenever, tune in wherever as well. Great thing to do instead of sitting there scrolling away on like some of those mind-numbing apps and stuff like that. Instead, you can maybe go and recapture your passion for things like physics, the great works of William Shakespeare, and more. So go and check them out right now at hillsdale.edu/locked-on to enroll. There's no cost. Easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/locked-on to register. hillsdale.edu/locked-on. Today's episode also brought to you by friends over at Prize Picks, your favorite and my favorite daily fantasy sports app. If you love watching the game, you're going to love it even more thanks to Prize Picks, because it's where football, basketball, and all your favorite sports comes together to help you win real cash. They can help make your holidays bigger and brighter. Right now, you can get up to 200 times your money on Prize Picks. Plus, this holiday season, they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during Pickmas and offering 2 free picks in December. It's awesome. All you got to do is pick 2 to 5 players, choose whether or not 2 to 6 players, choose whether or not they're going to come in at more or less than their Prize Picks projection, such as Travis Kelce, more or less than 70 receiving yards. You get those right, you can win real cash. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you win your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly when you play just $5, win or lose, with the Prize Picks app and promo code LOCKEDONNFL. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, family. We appreciate you very much for being here as we recap the New Orleans Saints 14-11 victory over the New York Giants. And the New Orleans Saints might not have walked away with a pretty victory, but they certainly walked away with great contributions from some young playmakers that they absolutely need to remain consistent and continue to contribute to this team. There's some good things that came out of this game, even though the Saints had to go all the way down to blocking a field goal at the last second to beat a 2-10 football team. I understand all that. Don't get me wrong. This is still a football team that had just as many total net yards, the New Orleans Saints, as they had punt yards in this game. We don't have to sit here and sugarcoat what this victory was for the New Orleans Saints. However, there were some individual young performances that I think are worth highlighting. So I want to start off with our dog of the day today. It's been a little while since we got to do a dog of the day, but when you have a game like defensive tackle Bryan Bresee had, where you get a sack, your 7.5 of the season, when you get 2 balls batted at the line of scrimmage, and you block what would have been a game-tying field goal to potentially send this game to overtime in order to seal the victory, yeah, you get a dog of the day nod. All right. It's going to happen. Bryan Bresee has been outstanding, especially over the course of the past few games. We've seen him consistently in the backfield. We've seen him consistently getting his hands up. We've seen him be disruptive. He still has some growing to do when it comes to his consistency, right? It's good to see him tie a couple of games together. Now, can he continue to be a force throughout the rest of the season? Of all the players right now that are the pass rushers for the New Orleans Saints that could potentially end up with double-digit sacks this season, many of us thought that would be Carl Granderson, maybe even Chase Young. Some people thought maybe Cam Jordan would, get back to that type of level of production this season. But not a lot of people pick Bryan Bresee to be a potential double-digit sack guy for the New Orleans Saints, the first one since, or for a couple of years. The New Orleans Saints have not had a double-digit sack guy. So Bryan Bresee with 7.5 sacks on the season and 4 games left to go on the year could potentially get there, especially if he continues his hot streak that he's on over the course of the past few games. There's been a couple of things that have stood out to me specifically about Bryan Bresee, and it's not just the numbers. One of the things that I loved that I heard Demario Davis talk about when we asked him about Bryan Bresee and all the things, what did you see from him and all that? I think it was Luke Johnson that asked the question over at NOLA.com, Times Picayune, was that Demario kind of talked about how Bryan Bresee is the quarterback of the defensive line, that when Demario is communicating things down to the defensive line, he often communicates them to Bryan because Bresee ends up being the guy that dictates and disseminates that information to the other guys on the defensive line before the snap. So you're seeing a young player come up and not just produce, but contribute to the production of other players on the defensive line and other players on the defense. I think that that's really massive, especially with the amount of stunts and twists and games that the New Orleans Saints play on their defensive line. Sometimes multiple stunts, multiple twists, multiple different styles of games. And by games, we think about it like think about like a route concept to where it's, two receivers on one side are doing one concept, two receivers on the other side are doing another concept. You can run concepts on your pass rush as well, for instance. And so they oftentimes call those games. And so how two defensive linemen cross one another? Is it an inside out stunt versus an outside inside twist? Is it a mush rush for the edge rusher so that they hold the outside lane but don't necessarily try to over pursue the quarterback? Those are all things that you would call games, for instance. So he helps to communicate a lot of those things, and the linebackers trust him to communicate checks and changes and things like that. So there's that piece. The other thing that's, of course, really easy to identify in Bryan Bresee's game is his athleticism. I mean, him leaping that offensive lineman, being able to get up and hang enough to be able to knock that ball down. He said that he didn't land as gracefully as he would have liked to, but being that he didn't get hurt out of the play, the landing was probably the least important part, right? It was the takeoff, it was the paw, it was the knockdown. That's the thing that really made the biggest thing. And look, if you think about something that you can learn a little bit through having a special teams coach as the interim head coach is that you get to hear things like Darren Rizzi talk about how that's a play. Like what they ran to get that block is a designed play to try to get a block based upon a look that they see from the style of kick that the field goal kicker has. So they called a specific play that they put in this week, worked on a few times on Friday, came out, saw an earlier field goal kick from Graham Gano, and then said, okay, if he since he's kicking like that, let's run this. And so they went in and ran that play, and that's how they end up getting the block. So I think something to highlight there in terms of the gamesmanship that is actually in special teams. It's not just kind of like luck and happenstance that, the block's set up perfectly and things like that. No, you're specifically trying to achieve things when you're running those plays. And that's an example of the play call being successful and Bryan Bresee executing because of his supreme athleticism. So for a guy that was drafted in the first round 2 seasons ago, it's great to see this level of production from Bryan Bresee, who I believe now is in the top 5 of New Orleans Saints history when it comes to defensive tackles and sacks in a single season with 7.5. He's up there now in conversations with guys like Leroy Glover. How incredible is that? So really cool to see that for Bryan Bresee, who has been fantastic for the New Orleans Saints. I mean, look, when you have first round picks like Chris Olave, who, sans the concussions and things like that, has produced for this team. Trevor Penning, who's been excellent since moved over to right tackle. Bryan Bresee panning out. Taliese Fuanga being again fantastic this week, although he was whistled for another, I think it was an illegal formation penalty or something like that, second week in a row on Alvin Kamara catches for some reason. But in any case, still has been phenomenal this season. The Saints have been hitting those first round picks. I think that is a really, really good sign there. Steve says that the Saints should sign Bresee long term. I think you'll definitely be seeing that in the coming years before that rookie contract gets played out. The other young player that you got to see make a bit of a difference this week was running back Kendre Miller. Let's take a look at Kendre Miller's day. Kendre Miller, 10 rushes for 32 yards, so just a 3.2 average. Up until the final offensive drive, he was averaging around 4.5 yards per carry, so that number came down. That average came down a little bit when he got more carries in obvious run situations when you're kind of in that 4-minute offense, but had a fantastic 8-yard rushing touchdown where he basically got locked up with a defender, kept his legs churning, kept things moving, and then had the offensive lineman come up behind him and push him into the end zone. He said that the play felt like it lasted 15, 20 seconds while he was there, but knew he was going to get into the end zone, kind of looked over to the side, saw the sideline, and was like, I'm going to get here. I'm going to score as that offensive line came up behind him to push him in. Really cool moment there. But we also saw some other good things from Kendre Miller, a 30-plus yard kickoff return. I believe it was 31 yards. He's now had 2 kickoff returns so far this season. Both of them have gone beyond the 30-yard line, so he's been helping from the field position perspective or however you want to look at it when it comes to special teams and his return ability, which is something he hasn't really done since high school, but he's proven that he can do it pretty well, especially with this new kickoff format. He also had some really nice cutbacks, showing a bit of the finesse that he has despite being the bigger body back in terms of the change of pace guy with Alvin Kamara. So felt like he was really excited. Said he didn't really have anything that he wanted to prove to anybody else, but had a lot that he wanted to prove to himself. Felt that he did prove that in today's game. Very excited to see more Kendre Miller going on. Really, really good to see him back on the field and contributing almost immediately as another one of these young playmakers, young stars that the New Orleans Saints need to see continue to contribute here throughout the rest of the season. Coming up next, the rest of the season does get a lot tougher for the New Orleans Saints. What are we going to be looking for? What are the challenges ahead? We're going to break all of that down as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by friends over at FanDuel. The New Orleans Saints did not cover their 4.5-point spread in this game with just a 3-point win. They will certainly be underdogs up against the Washington Commanders, who are coming off of a bye week next week at home as the New Orleans Saints travel back to host Jaden Daniels, the sure-to-be Offensive Rookie of the Year, next week at the Superdome. If you want to get in on all of that action, you're going to want to head to FanDuel.com today. And right now, new customers are going to get started with $150 in bonus bets by simply winning your first $5 bet. Put $5 down, win that bet, bam, $150 in bonus bets as long as that's your first $5 bet. You can also download the app today so you can get in on live stats, live tracking, play-by-play. You can even get into some live betting all in the same window as well. That's FanDuel.com. That's where you're going to want to go to get started. And you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets by simply winning your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints got a win that they very much needed to get against a team that they were better than on paper in the New York Giants. Now they have two more opponents that are considered much better than them on the other side here as a reward for their win here at MetLife Stadium. Before we get to taking a look ahead at the New Orleans Saints schedule, I meant to hit on the Derek Carr leap, the dive or whatever you want to call it, that ended up leading to the injury to the left hand. While I admire and respect very much the intention behind the leap to show that he's willing to give everything for the city, give everything for the team and all those other things, I understand all that. Probably a better decision to just slide in that situation. And look, I completely respect Derek Carr for what he did and what he was trying to do and everything like that. Juwan Johnson was really eloquent in talking about this. I'm nowhere near as eloquent as Juwan Johnson, but it was one of those things where it's like, hey, play for the next down because the team needs you to be available. Don't go out there and do something that could potentially get you hurt. So while I admire the aggressive nature of like, yeah, I'm going to go leap and get this first down, I love the confidence in that. Probably better to just either cut back inside and maybe even get the first down or just run out of bounds. It's 2nd and 9. You got a 3rd down coming up. And in the way that it all ended up panning out is that he made that leap for the first down, didn't get it. 3rd down, the Saints come out and they run another pitch on 3rd and short. It's getting old and it's not working. Every time the New Orleans Saints seem to do this, it's not working. They need to find another sort of punch here when it comes to those 3rd and shorts with Alvin Kamara and with these running backs. But it didn't end up, you had the punt anyway. And the quarterback got hurt. So probably better to just play it a little bit safe there. And again, I'm not insulting Derek Carr for the decision. I respect the decision of saying, you know what, I'm going to go out there and put it all out on the line and go out there and try to get this first down and put this game away and everything like that. I get it. I'm all about it. Love seeing him run the read option, getting the wheels out there a little bit, everything, all about all of that. It's just take the slide, run out of bounds, reset, stay in the game for your team. I'm sure he wants that play back. I'm not saying anything that I'm sure Derek Carr is not thinking himself, but I did want to make sure that I mentioned that because then you also had Jake Haener come in, took a bad sack at one point on the rollout, just throw it away. You know what I mean? So like all of those things could have been avoided by having the veteran guy in. And maybe this game is a little bit more of a comfortable victory than that sort of nail biter of a, field goal block and all those other things. Maybe you could have avoided some of that stuff. So I think that like, it's just kind of one of those things where there's the balance. I respect it so much in terms of the showing of all of it. But stay out there, right? Keep yourself healthy, be out there for your team. That's a tricky one. It's a really tricky one to navigate. Again, no shade at Derek Carr. I get the decision, but you want to be out there for your team, and certainly the team wants to be out there for you, or wants you to be out there as well, and they want to be out there with you. All right, so looking ahead to the New Orleans Saints schedule, right? Things just got a lot more complicated. It was already complicated. They got the Washington Commanders and the surefire offensive rookie of the year coming to town, fresh off of a bye week, a lot of rest for that Washington Commanders team. They're going to be traveling to New Orleans to take on the Saints. The Saints have continued to struggle against the mobile quarterbacks. We saw it time and time again today up against Drew Lock, who's not even a mobile quarterback, but 3rd and 15, 4th and 10. They just picked up all these 3rd and longs, 4th and longs, and oftentimes did it because of the legs of Drew Lock. Now imagine the legs of Jaden Daniels. That's going to be a big challenge for this New Orleans Saints defense. So that is where these things begin to stack up. Now, where the Saints could potentially end up finding a bit of an edge against the Washington Commanders is going to be with their run game. But we did see the Saints not have the day, the rushing day that they should have had up against the New York Giants, certainly that they intended to have against the New York Giants in this game, really on both sides of the football. I do think that the Saints held both running backs back very well. Tyrone Tracy only had 2.8 yards per carry. Devin Singletary only carried the ball twice. Then there were 5 rushes, 59 yards by Drew Lock, who actually led the Giants there. So when you look at the overall numbers, you're going to see a 4.9 yard average given up. Really, with the running backs, they were fantastic against them. So really, really good stuff there. But the Saints averaged only 2.8 yards per carry with everybody, and that includes Alvin Kamara, who averaged just 2.6. Kendre Miller, who finished with an average of 3.2. You get where, and then Jamal Williams, who had 3 rushes for 5 yards, 1.7 yards when it came to that. So the Saints have got to be able to actually take advantage of the advantage that they should have and the opportunity they should have next week up against what is a little bit of a weakness for the Washington Commanders, which is their run defense. So that's one of those things where the Saints are going to have to do like they tried to do against the Los Angeles Rams and keep that Washington Commanders offense off the field. But it gets tougher if you don't have your starting quarterback. So that ends up compounding and multiplying the sort of challenge of what that week is going to be. Then you got to travel to go up against Green Bay, who are just, let's just call it what it is, are a better team, right? They're a better team than they were the last time that these two teams met, where the Saints had them on the ropes 0-17 at halftime and then ended up losing that game. Green Bay Packers are a much better team, at least right now. We'll see what happens over the course of the next couple of weeks. And then they just had that tough loss against the Detroit Lions, but I mean, the Lions are the best team in football, and the Green Bay Packers took them all the way down to a last-second field goal. So, man, then you add on top of that the fact that it's Monday night game, December 23rd in Green Bay, Wisconsin, in an open-air stadium, and we saw Blake Grupe miss a couple of field goals out here today, and it wasn't even that cold out here. The conditions weren't even that crazy, and so then you transplant that, if you will, or transfer that to the Lambeau Field in the wintry conditions. Not ideal. Not the ideal conditions for a kicker. So the road just gets a little bit tougher for the New Orleans Saints going ahead. So it ends up becoming a big-time proving ground. These are big games for Darren Rizzi, who, look, got this win. Saints have won more games with Darren Rizzi than they have with Dennis Allen this season. They won 2 games with Dennis Allen. They've already won 3 games out of the first 4 with Darren Rizzi. So they're a better football team with Darren Rizzi at the helm. There's no doubt about that. I don't think you can make any argument against that. And it's lovely that Darren Rizzi got this win at home, or like back near his home here in near Bergen County, New Jersey, here in East Rutherford. Great for all that, right? Awesome story and awesome for Darren Rizzi. But certainly the got to turn the page very quickly because you got 2 big tests on the way. A couple other things that I want to highlight here before we get out of here tonight. Chase Young tied his career high in single game pressures, according to Next Gen Stats, with 10 pressures in this game. Did not end up with any sacks on the day. Unfortunately, the only sack was by Bryan Bresee, and then Colin Saunders also had a sack. But for Chase Young, a really impressive game for him. He had 3 hits on the quarterback, came up with a tackle, came up with a pass defense where he actually dropped back into coverage, almost came up with an interception, and that one beside himself when he didn't get the interception. But really good to see. Chase Young was top 5 in the NFL in total quarterback pressures this season. Going into this game, added another 10 in this game, so he should stay up there. Demario Davis's hands came in from Amazon. The shipment made it on time. He ends up getting an interception in this game. It's really cool to see there. That's the Saints' first takeaway since 3 weeks ago up against the Atlanta Falcons. So good to see the Saints kind of get back onto the side of takeaways, especially in a game where they also had a turnover themselves on an intercepted pass as well. And then the last thing I want to leave you with here doesn't really factor into this game, but just something to keep an eye out on. You might remember New Orleans Saints defensive line coach Todd Grantham was moved from coaching the defensive line, even though he actually maintains the title of defensive line coach, was moved from coaching the defensive line to being a senior defensive assistant, helping Joe Woods over on the defensive side. Well, he has now been hired by the Oklahoma State Cowboys to go and join their coaching staff after this season. So he's going to be heading there as their new defensive coordinator. So really, really interesting hire there. But that does mean that the New Orleans Saints will have very likely a new defensive line coach next season. Now, obviously, the entire defensive staff could end up changing based upon who the head coach is and all those other things, but a really just sort of interesting thing there because he effectively got moved off of his role here in New Orleans and now gets a better role or a bigger role as a defensive coordinator over with the Oklahoma State Cowboys. So just a big thing to watch there. At least one change on the New Orleans Saints coaching staff coming. Maybe Brian Young holds on to that position, or maybe it's an all new defensive staff anyway with the new head coaching hire. We'll see. But there you go. Those are our notes. Coming up in tomorrow's episode, we'll dive a little bit more into this performance and what it means for the New Orleans Saints. We'll get a little bit more into the run game, what worked, what didn't work, and a little bit of that tight end room we didn't get to in this one. The tight end room, major contributions again this week. The most selfless room on the team, perhaps, continues to put up numbers, and you'll love to see it. We got that all coming up for you on our next episode of Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much for making us your first listen. And of course, for your second listen, make sure you go and check out Locked On NFL, Tyler and Tony, giving you all the biggest stories from around the National Football League. We appreciate you very, very much. And I thank you for being here and making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing, how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.